Once we disclose at a high enough level that everybody has to believe it, then that door can never be closed again, because it's a door in every single human mind. And the deepest fear might be that something is going to come through that door that we can't control and that will control us.
Welcome. I'm here with the inimitable Whitley Strieber. Whitley, it's a pleasure seeing you again, and thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so the fourth mind. I don't want to get right into it because, but I do want people to go out and immediately buy your book and all that good stuff. But let's build up to it, because I don't want you to give away too many of your secrets. Otherwise, they won't need to buy your book.
No, don't worry about it. I'll give away all my secrets.
But people should still buy your book. All right. So, and by the way, this is all me. Whitley did not ask me to promote the book or anything like that, but I just appreciate the work that you've been doing for so many years. I don't know if I've told you in our past interviews, but I think I read your book, Communion, when I was 12 years old. I don't know why. I kind of just picked it up, sometime in either the summer of 1987 or 88. It's a while, but I still have it on my shelf. Whenever the paperback came out, I don't know if it came out at the same time as the hardcover. They at least now tend to lag, but all right. So in terms of recent events, where do you think we are in the disclosure movement and in having at least more public revelations from what you call the visitors?
Well, they're two entirely different things. Disclosure by elements of the government is a complicated and fraught business for a lot of reasons. There are tremendous forces inside the government, centered in the Defense Department, that do not want this to happen for a whole lot of different reasons. Some of the reasons are even in conflict with each other. There is some pressure from Congress, not that much, actually. The community hangs on every little crumb that comes out of Congress in hopes of that they will it finally get something. But there's going to be a number of problems. First of all, the resistance is far deeper than they imagine. If it wasn't, the Congress would have been, the original Schumer amendment would have been passed in the Congress as is. Instead, the defense industry had two of its bought Congress people on the Intelligence Committee gut the bill, making it.
It's Mike Turner, and I'm not sure the other one is, but he represents.
Well, exactly.
Alabama.
Mainly it was Mike Turner.
Yeah.
And, these people are, the way Congress works, you have to be reelected every 2 years. I've known numerous people who've been in Congress, and they all start out as freshmen the same way, full of idealism, and then they realize that what they've actually bought into is a money-raising scheme, that most of their work involves raising money. And the political part of it, and especially their idealism, goes out the window because they're there to raise money. I knew my daddy supported a congressman from San Antonio called Henry Gonzalez. He was the first Hispanic congressman from Texas, and Dad being Dad, he put his money where his mouth was and supported him when he was just starting out, and he became a great congressman. But he used to say, all I do is raise money, and my staff does my political work because I don't have time. So given that, these people are totally compromised from the beginning.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm. We saw that with what happened to the amendment, to the Schumer bill. I don't think there's anyone powerful enough in the Congress to really move the ball ahead. And when I say move the ball forward, I mean get it to the point where someone with a sufficient amount of authority can say and prove that we are in direct contact of some kind with non-human intelligence. That was broached in the Kennedy administration. It was broached in the George Bush administration, the young George Bush administration. And in October of the last year of that administration, Hal Puthoff says that people met and they divided into a number of committees, and they all went into it saying to themselves, yes, it's time, we're going to disclose. And then they came out of it, every one of them saying the same thing. We don't feel it is time. We don't feel it can be done because there are too many imponderables and unknowns. Now there is a couple of rumors about. One is from Chris Bledsoe that the second coming or something like it will happen on Easter Sunday of next year, in which case, if that actually happens, then we don't have to worry about the government. Its disclosure will happen on its own. The second one is that the huge ship will arrive in 2027, and it will be billed as the first time aliens have ever been here, thus getting the whole can of worms of the abductions and all the shooting war and all of that. We can then put all of that aside and start fresh. And into the trash pile will go all of the close encounter witnesses, but they don't care about them at all. They're just in the way, including this one. So I think, in truth, what will happen is probably what I believe the visitors have indicated to me, and I am not a guru, and I don't have a special relationship with Hathor or whatever it is. I'm just a person who has a certain amount of contact with what are obviously other people who are very strange compared to us by our standards. They're not gods. They're not angels. They're not demons. They're tired, scared little creatures who, when you're face to face with them, seem like animals who are more intelligent than you are. There's a profound cultural gap with no cultural synergy. It's a really weird experience. You don't hear people say that much because they're not actually in that kind of contact very much. Not at all. In the government, half of them seem to think it's demons. Mm-hmm. Half of them seem to think it's angels. But none of them seem to think what it really is, which is just what I said. That's what they are. There's no magic here. They have a lot of technological skills that we don't possess, but that doesn't mean we can't possess them. And we can't understand them. We can understand them and possess them. Will this ever come into focus? Well, I'm afraid it might, in a very sad way. If the environment collapses and mankind is in danger of going extinct, I think that our visitors will make their best effort to prevent that from happening. And in the context of that, we're going to see them. But I doubt very much that, for example, people say to me, well, why don't they just land? Then you hear Jake Barber talking about shooting them down. Of course they're not going to just land. And Jake's only one rather sweet guy who talked about this. There's evidence that there was a big shooting war going on back in the 50s. Mm-hmm. And, no, they're not going to be coming and landing here. That's not going to happen, because unless we are somehow demilitarized and have some kind of a believable agreement with them that they feel safe, they don't even feel safe with me. They're scared to death. They were with a friend of mine a few weeks ago, and this female being had 3 guardians with her, and the guardians were scared to death that something would happen to her. And, if they're scared of people who are relatively good in engaging with them, they're certainly not going to be on the White House lawn anytime soon, I don't think.
Yeah, well, I think if the government continues to suppress this, I mean, personally, I think we've already jumped the shark in terms of, I don't think there's any way that the government can disclose this without risking. I don't think it's about ontological shock. I think it's about governmental collapse. Because I think once you start pulling the strings on all the lies that we've been told for at least my entire life, probably yours too, I think the credibility of the secret keepers will be destroyed. And then, it might result in what I think is classically called the fourth turning, right? We're in the midst of the fourth turning right now. And this might be our generation, or the fourth turning, the fourth turning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you familiar? You're familiar with that?
I thought, now what? I understand.
The fourth mind, now the fourth coming. No, I'm talking about the how, and I can't remember there's a book they wrote in the 90s called Generations, and it looks at, so we're in the midst of the fourth turning. I understand
the fourth turning, yeah.
Yeah, I think the last one was World War II. The one before that was the Civil War. So that's the kind of magnitude situation we're in. So I think it has to be the other has to do the disclosure, or we have to find some way around government. In recent weeks, anecdotally, again, who knows where this stuff comes from, but you can see it from reactions on Twitter and just anecdotally through people through my network. AI has gotten to the point where you can give it, let's take Roswell, for instance, you can give it the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is that Roswell didn't happen. The official story is true. If you feed it enough of the data in the public domain and you ask it to do a Bayesian analysis, right? So just probabilistic. If this is true, then what's the probability that X is true? If you train the AI appropriately with just the data that's out there, it will say that the null hypothesis, the probability that the null hypothesis is true is virtually zero, right? That Roswell, there's almost 100% chance that it was not the mogul balloon. It was not, what the Air Force's official cover story. Something did crash. Bodies were recovered. And people are using that to find increasingly more information about the past that they just kind of want to, at first they wanted to draw the line at 2017 and not just ignore everything in the past. And anecdotally, people in the intelligence community were freaking out a little bit because they know that AI is going to provide people with an independent means of learning these things. And it got to the point that meetings allegedly were scheduled with Sam Altman to try to find ways to censor AI. Now, that's just my speculation about censoring AI, but there were definitely meetings with Sam Altman, who's, for people who don't know, is the CEO of ChatGPT. And what I believe is they were trying to find ways to suppress that information, like they suppress information on Google, like they suppress information on Facebook, Twitter, etc.
Yeah, they ghost me on Google. Try searching for my YouTube channel if you've never
100%. I didn't even know you had a channel, and I just kind of stumbled onto it. And I think you had mentioned this
because they ghost me. It's called shadow banning.
Yeah, 100%.
It's just I do all the right SEO. I have pros that do it. It's excellent, but it doesn't work for me. And you look at my numbers on my YouTube channel, they're probably 5% of what they should be.
Yeah.
Simply because people can't find me, and that's done on purpose. It's not an accident.
But here's the thing, Whitley. These people who have been trained in the intelligence community, and just for full disclosure, I was a military officer. I was assessed as a military intelligence officer, but what they did is they put me part of a branch detail program where they loaned me to the armor branch, which was tanks and stuff like that. So I did that for 4 years. Then they put me on stop loss because of the Iraq war happened, which pissed me off. It just means you can't leave until we say you can leave. And I got a TSSCI clearance, but then I just got out. I never had any training in military intelligence. But what I do notice from, these people are still using the same tricks that they used 50 years ago, and those tricks don't work anymore. So for instance, when I learned that your channel was shadow banned, to me, that's a signal. And that signal says he's right over target. And you can see the same thing on Twitter. If you say something that they don't want you to say, you'll get attacked by 1,000 bots that have, that were the accounts were started in like March 2021. They have very few followers. They're following not so many accounts, and they just come out of the woodwork and attack. And it's supposed to shame and scare you, but all it does is there are other open source intelligence people, just regular civilians, who take note of these accounts and then map their networks. And they always trace back to the same set of accounts. And I'm not going to mention names or anything like that. But the old tricks don't work anymore. It's obvious, like all of it is just, it's like this big show. So, and this, again, the tell is always the fuss. The more fuss that they have, the more likely it's some kind of an op. So I think that people are frustrated, and it's actually going to be increasingly difficult. Even if true, the government comes out and discloses some of this stuff, people won't believe it because they've been lied to for so long.
And well, and also the close encounter people, the experiencers, are an irritant. We're an irritant because we are the living, breathing symbol of the Air Force's failure to do its job, which is to protect the people from threats from above. Mm-hmm. That did not happen at all. Not at all. And they've known about it from the beginning. When we first started to have this, when I was doing research for Communion, when I decided to write the book and was doing research, David W. Webb showed up in our life. David is a lovely guy. Communion is dedicated to him in part. He's passed on now, but he was a space scientist. And if you look at his Wikipedia page, assuming it's still up and hasn't been altered because I've been talking about him lately, you will see that he was a consultant to every alphabet agency in the country. And he was incredibly frank about all of this. He came to the cabin in hopes of engaging with the visitors. He was extremely encouraging. And he said to me, Whitley, you are the only person who has ever been able to do this. And we want you to continue and do your best. And he introduced me to an allergist who gave me allergy medication to inject that would prevent me from getting into an allergy problem with the close proximity of the grays. He gave us epinephrine injectors and encouraged us to have other people up to the cabin who had had experiences in hopes that group experiences would take place, and that all happened. Meanwhile, the other side of the intelligence community, whoever else was, someone didn't want that. And they began to attack me on all kinds of levels. For example, after I published my book, Confirmation, there appeared in Parade magazine an article saying that I had discovered I had temporal lobe epilepsy and had made a big contribution to the Epilepsy Foundation. A total lie. So I got in touch with them. And the editor was, oh, Whitley Strieber, yes, your friends in the Air Force helped me with that story. And I think it's such a courageous thing that you did to admit that. I said, you understand the story's fake. I didn't admit it. In fact, my tests show I don't have temporal lobe epilepsy. And so he says something like, well, why did you tell them that? I said, I didn't tell them that. They're lying to you, and you have to make a correction. And they did. But of course, the correction didn't matter. It doesn't matter to the public. The public doesn't read corrections. The public is only interested in the bad news. If you are going to get taken down, they will go for it. And if it turns out later that was a lie, they won't go for that. So I was hurt by that. And that's just one of many, many things that were done and are still done. It's not over yet, as per the shadow banning. I've been fighting against I've had the government fighting against me and for me both for years. And now, when we get into this disclosure thing, people like Lou Elizondo, Jake Barber, David Grush, they won't interview with me. Gary Nolan has interviewed with me in the past, but I don't think he will now because they're all worried about the woo factor, as they call it. They want to be taken seriously. Hal Puthoff, who's been a friend for years, is now interviewing all over the place, but not with me, because they're afraid that they will be painted, tarred with the close encounter brush, and laughed off the stage. That's the ostensible reason.
None of those individuals that you just mentioned, with the exception of Jake Barber, because I haven't reached out to him, will interview with me either, and I don't know why.
No, they won't, because I just wonder if it's all some kind of thing that's designed, and they only have certain people that are kind of on their wavelength that are sort of approved. And certainly someone like you or me is not going to be approved for anything. So
I think that's exactly correct. Let's give you an example. So you've seen this whole news with Lou Elizondo with the irrigation circle picture, right? Lou didn't make a mistake. That was intentional. Now, given his background and the unit that he worked with when he was doing, because again, look, he's a counterintelligence expert, right? So he has a mission, and I believe in all his patriotism and things like that. But what counterintelligence people do is they're spy catchers, right? So if you have a disclosure movement and you have someone who's deep in a classified program who's like, yeah, I've seen this, boom, I got you. So that may or may not be what his mission is. But in his past, he worked with this organization, or he was part of this organization called the Intelligence Support Activity, which is, think of it as like an army or military intelligence version of the CIA, right? They do all the stuff that JSOC would want the CIA to do, but is too dangerous for the CIA to do. So for someone from that pedigree to make a mistake like that, like he wouldn't have survived being in that unit if he made mistakes like that. So I think what he did was very intentional. Now, I don't know what the intention was. Maybe it was meant to have an option to discredit Luna if at some point in the future that particular hearing didn't go the way that they wanted, where he could just someone else could point back and say, oh, that was completely discredited because Lou held up that ridiculous photo. I don't know what his game is there, but I think it's very low probability that was not intentional.
Yeah, I have little knowledge of it. Kelly Chase and I are going to be discussing it extensively on Dreamland, I think the last week in next week, in fact. And she thinks it was intentional also. I reserve, having had many, many, many interviews in my life and been in situations where I could have easily made a mistake like that. I'm not so sure. But
Whitley, would you have made that mistake in front of Congress?
No, I would not.
That's the distinction.
Yeah, well, that's true. And he certainly might as well interview with us now because he doesn't have any audience except us anymore.
That doesn't matter. They'll repackage it and, give it 9 months down the line. He'll come out anew. He'll find religion.
Something I heard years ago may be in the background here. And when something like that happens, the self-discrediting happens, I always think about it. And I'm not sure whether this came from Art Exon, General Exon, or not. But somehow in those days when I was talking to Art and Exon and my Uncle Mickey and a number of other people who came forward in different ways to talk to me about the secret stuff, I got the idea that a scientist who was working on this back in the old days, Dr. John von Neumann, a physicist and cyberneticist, the very, very prominent physicist in his day.
Well, he's behind the von Neumann probes, right? The self-replicating
Yeah,
AI. That's him.
Yeah. Well, when he was working on this, one of the things he was working on was how did they get here? And his idea was that perhaps they were, and also there's something really weird about them, which you get to know them, is that they are strikingly accurate in every movement. There's a machine-like accuracy to them that's startling. It's more accurate than anything you've ever seen or experienced. It's very, very strange. And yet at the same time, they are very complex individuals. They have a group mind, and people call it a hive mind because they don't know what they're talking about. It's no hive mind. It's a very big, complex mind that has an enormous amount of difficulty making decisions. That's one of the reasons they move so slowly, because they have so many alternatives that they consider, and they're all feeding into it from God knows how extensive their network is. It could be that they're all on, all over the universe. They're all on the same wavelength. We don't know. But in any case, their intellect is very good, but it moves very slowly by our standards. And it's only one mind. They are always of one mind. Now, John von Neumann, looking at this, I guess he was looking at this, thought to himself, perhaps these are machines. Perhaps these are ultra-sophisticated conscious machines. And the von Neumann machine idea came from that, I think. But that's not really what I'm talking about here. This is a memo, a short memo that von Neumann apparently wrote. And I wish I could say this definitely, but I can't. I think this might have happened. That it said essentially that if their mind was more powerful and more accurately reflected the reality than ours does, in other words, they were more informed about what isn't real and isn't true, that they're coming into close proximity to us could plunge us into a state of non-meaning, and if we open that door, which is a door in our minds, by having in those days Truman or Eisenhower come up and say they're here and they're real, if we crossed a certain line, it would be a tripwire, and they would then completely take over the whole construct of reality, pushing our understanding of the world aside. And I wrote a short story in those days called The Open Doors about John von Neumann in the last days of his life. He died a hard and terrified death. He was absolutely terrified of dying. And about the fact that once we disclose at a high enough level that everybody has to believe it, then that door can never be closed again, because it's a door in every single human mind. And the deepest fear might be that something is going to come through that door that we can't control and that will control us.
It's almost like a double slit experiment, right? Where if you observe the electron, it doesn't exhibit this fringe pattern. It doesn't show the probability of outcomes. It just shows you kind of shape reality in some sense, right? And one theory that I just came up with, I don't, there's no way to support or defend this, but if you're familiar with Hugh Everett's multiverse theory or many worlds theory, right?
Sure.
That follows that double slit experiment. But what it says is, instead of just that probability distribution collapsing into one outcome, it never collapses. Every single possible outcome manifests, okay? But in order for that theory to work, once the particular outcome that you're in manifests, you can never visit those other outcomes, right? They just kind of separate. But imagine if, and that's kind of from a materialist standpoint, but imagine if consciousness is fundamental. Let's say that there was a pathway that had collapsed off thousands of years ago where you had some sort of divergent evolution. And let's say the species of gray was part of it. Or it could be some completely different species that we can't even conceive of what it looks like. The only way for a species like that, let's say they wanted to cross over into one of these parallel branches, would be on a consciousness level. And the only way to manifest in this reality is to convince someone or some other species to create these biological androids, right? And then inhabit these biological androids, so we're talking about the small grays, with their consciousness. Again, it doesn't quite fit the Occam's razor kind of requirement of parsimony, but maybe that's when Grush talks about them being interdimensional. Maybe that's part of, and I know Gary Nolan seems to think that there's some element of these entities being biological avatars to some extent, right? But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah.
It's a pretty out there theory, but what do you think of it?
Well, there's certainly something about them that, as I discussed earlier, that is very machine-like, but at the same time, they are richly emotional and sensitive to our emotions. So it's a real conundrum. Are these robots that are more emotionally complex and sensitive than we are? That could be the case. And if that is the case, then what in the world created them? And why isn't that here? And then you get down into the cracks of the creation of the universe and the mysteries of the fine structure constant and where it comes from. That's the constant that basically governs the shape of reality. In other words, everything looks as it does because the fine structure constant is 1/137th. If it was another number, things would look different. Things would be different. The whole structure of the universe would be different. Problem is, there's no basis for it. The other constants, we can all understand where the physics of the constant starts, the Planck constant and so forth. But not that one. It seems arbitrary. And it could be that, are we looking here at God's taste in universes? Is that what the fine structure constant is? Because someone like Wolfgang Pauli was fascinated by the fine structure constant and the fact that there's no way to derive it, to the point that he started a correspondence with the mystical psychologist Carl Jung, a very interesting correspondence, incidentally. It's all been published. And the question of what is this was the central theme of their correspondence. I mean, by this, what is all of this? What is this? And you get down to the point where if somebody could see it from the outside, they would know what it is. And if that's the case, then when David Grush says interdimensional, what he doesn't know is that there's somebody who can literally hold this whole thing that we call reality in their conceptual hands. And that might be the grays. They might be that far advanced. I think they live outside of time. And I think that they are struggling with a lack of spontaneity. And that go into this in the fourth mind fairly extensively, that their desire to have communion with us involves being able to slip into our perpetual sense of the new. Because when you and I sat down this morning, then everything, every second, every instant is always new. And it has been all through the thing. Right before we started, I had no idea that my internet would go out. but maybe the Greys have known it for millions of years. You see the
And
difference?
it may not have been a coincidence either.
Well, exactly. But the point is this: if you're like that, you can't be surprised. And that would be why when I asked one of them, I used to take these walks in the woods at night, which I'm glad I did. Now it was scary as hell, but at the same time, my whole life comes out of those walks in the woods more than anything. And I never came into face-to-face contact with the visitors during the walks. But every once in a while, I would feel that they were quite nearby. And one night, I thought that there was one that was near me, and I felt a sense of familiarity. I thought it was male and it was old, and it was right out in the brush beside the path. I knew not to shine the flashlight out there because then it would be gone. So I just sat down, and there was a log there, I guess I could sit on, because I remember sitting on something. And I went into the meditative state, and I said, I know you're here. And there was a sense of presence. And so I said, I thought I can ask a question. And I knew this individual was old. I could feel the flavor of him very clearly. So my question was this: what does the universe mean to you? And then I knew I was with one of them, because there immediately came into my mind something I can't do, which is a vivid image. And you know what that image was? A coffin. A coffin. And if you know the beginning, end, and middle of anything, you're not free. You're trapped. You're trapped. You're dead and alive at the same time. You're dead because you know the future and the past perfectly. You're alive because you are still a breathing being. And I think that they are in that state. And I think, when I get into this meditative state at 3:00 in the morning, something will come into me and share my body with me. And I think they love it. They love it. And I think it's because they get the feeling of spontaneity. All of a sudden, everything that is already known to them suddenly becomes new again. And I can see where that would be literally an addiction. We might be their drug of choice in that sense. Now, people say, oh my God, that's possession. No, it's not even close. The last thing they want to do is possess you. It took me years to even notice that there was a presence inside me beside myself, because they don't want to possess. That's exactly what they don't want. They want to ride with you in the adventure of your life, not to possess you.
It's interesting you say that too, because you talk to people who've had near-death experiences. It's almost like, at least for us, there's a veil, and call it what do the Greeks call it? The river Letha or Leth. I can't pronounce it properly, but the river of forgetfulness that you cross.
Oh, no, it's the cup of forgetfulness, the milk of Nepenthe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and you drink it, obviously it's almost like this life is, we get novelty, we get tested, etc., but we forget who we are when we enter it. On the other side, again, according to near-death experiencers, thousands of different accounts, there's this sense of knowing everything, knowing the past, future, present simultaneously, and the simultaneity of time. Everything's happening all at once. And the best explanation I've seen of this concept is, are you familiar with Itzhak Bentov?
Sure.
So in Stalking the Wild Pendulum, he shows like a 2x2 matrix with space and time. And the closer you get on the, just space on one axis, time on the other, the closest you bend time towards zero, it collapses and everything is simultaneous. So
Yeah.
how do you think that compares with their experience of reality, if that experience of reality is an accurate one for humanity?
Well, it seems to me, my wife's near-death experience and her subsequent return after she physically died, there was a very gentle acceptance of this. In other words, she wasn't bothered by it. They are bothered by it. So there's something different somewhere along the lines. In the other level of reality where our souls are, the visitors are very much more present than they are here. And I don't think there's conflict there. I think it's not a conflicted situation. But what is interesting to me is that the human side of it seems very much at ease with this knowing, whereas the visitors don't seem to be at ease with it at all. So what's the difference? The difference is that we might be a higher level, a higher form of being. That might be why we are able to go in this level of life and live as we do. These bodies might actually be a higher technology than their bodies. We might be a more advanced species and more skilled at creating bodies that can generate spontaneous experience. And that would be why it doesn't bother us, because when we know we can always go into the physical and adjust our energy levels of our souls by designing a life that fits those needs. And they can't do that. They can't ever escape. They're always, even when they are connected to a body, their bodies are not adequately part of the physical world because they're very slight and fragile and they can float around and jump. They're obviously not nearly as dense physically as we are. And I think that these physically super dense bodies are what gives us the ability to be completely enveloped in the stream of time. And when we die and we go out, we know we can come back in if we wish. And they can't. They're always, to some extent, out of the stream of time, even when they're in one of their bodies.
I literally said something similar in a few prior interviews to this. And the reason I said something similar is if you look at the literature from contactees, abductees, however you want to frame them, experiencers, there's often a question that an experiencer will ask, and the answer will be something like, you all have no idea how powerful you truly are. And it is repeated over and over again. Why would a being with seemingly advanced technology say something like that? And I think your hypothesis may be a reason why.
Yeah, I think it's possible. And by the way, listeners, we are hypothesizing here. These are not certainties.
100%.
So 100%, this is a wonderful time in our relationship with what we call non-human intelligence, NHI, because we can speculate still. We don't know where we stand, and that's a very cool place to be, at least for someone like me. I love this kind of thing. So don't take our words at absolute face value and say, this is the gospel. And I bring this up because once the disclosure, if there is a disclosure process, if someone at the presidential level or something along those lines says these people are real, a lot of people will go back into the internet looking at shows like this and hungry for information. So I just always warn people, don't take it at face value. It's speculative now. And I say
100.
also, as I said earlier, I love it. I love this. This is a wonderful time to be alive.
Do you think we were going to find out in our lifetimes
Oh
on
yeah.
an official level?
Well, I don't know whether the official world is able to do that, but I do think that the visitors, if we get to the point where we're losing the planet and we're not going to be able to have human beings on it anymore, they're going to intervene because they have to, not because they want to, and they're going to be pissed off. But they're always pissed off anyway, as far as I can tell. So who cares? And that may be when we first see them, when we first know they're real. And because I'm not sure that the Defense Department and the defense industry have a way out that leads to public admission of the presence of NHI. I don't see that they do. And I think that they're going to resist. Now, Donald Trump, one of the things I learned about the visitors is that they're big on things like nominative determinism. And the name Trump, when that name came up in politics, I thought Trump, the Trump card, big changes. And, they may very well use him as their mouthpiece. And he could say anything. I mean, he's a very Trumpy guy. I mean, he really is. I mean, he's a Trump person. And his name is Trump. And I think it's quite possible that he could suddenly say one day, well, yeah, the aliens are here. They've been here for years. And that would change the world. And he'd probably go on to the next thing in a second or two and forget about it. But, everybody would be, all the jaws in the world would be on the floor. And that could happen easily, I think. I think it's quite possible.
Just to back up that point, what's interesting is when he first took office, before he took office, he promised to tell the American people, or to get to the bottom of the kind of the drone. I keep calling them drones, but they're not drones. They were UFOs, UAPs. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. But did you see? Did you see all those
balloons? Is that
balloons?
something you do in your show?
No, not at all. Not at all. Sometimes Zoom will do that. There's like finger gestures that you make that will send up a bunch of likes.
I've never seen anything like that before. So
I've never seen that. What's that?
Let's not be deflected from talking about the drones, because if anything, if that was intentional, that was the purpose. So let's go ahead.
Yeah,
I agree with you, by the way. I don't think that I think they're NHI. I don't think that they're China, but that's now the meme. And the 60 Minutes came out a few weeks ago saying it was Chinese. The drones were Chinese. And that's the end of that as far as the public's concerned. They were Chinese.
Yes. So Whitley, on that point. So I've never really talked about my background, but my thesis advisor for my master's degree was Dr. Ash Carter, who subsequently became Obama's Secretary of Defense. So from a kind of a military and defense background, I can tell you conclusively that those were not Chinese drones. If those were Chinese drones, in fact, there's a case at Vandenberg in 2022 where there was a Chinese operative flying a drone over Vandenberg. And Vandenberg Air Force Base had drone tracking technology, tracked that drone back to its point of origin, and arrested that Chinese operative. So if those were Chinese drones, number one, we would have shot one down because humans make mistakes. There would have been an issue with it. And number two, we would have retaliated, because you can't, if you operate that brazenly on American soil, we will respond. It might be something small, but we might sink a base in the South China Sea or do something, but there would be a tit-for-tat response. Those were not Chinese drones. There's no way they were Chinese drones. But going back to the point before the balloons distracted us, they're not balloons either, by the way, which is the normal, the old 1950s explanation. What was interesting was he promised to get us that. And when Trump promises something, and he's the one who's going to be the one that wants to deliver it, because exactly with this Trumpian thing. But what did you notice about how he responded to that? Did he respond, or did he have his press secretary respond?
I didn't notice.
He had his press secretary respond. That's highly indicative of the likelihood that Trump's not going to want to deliver bad news, right? He only delivers good news. That's what Trump does. So he had Levitt deliver that, oh, it's all FAA research, FAA approved. It's all just research drones. Number one, why are you flying SUV? Oh, there we go. There's another one. Why are you flying SUV-sized drones over nuclear power plants? Is that safe research? Is that something that's safe that you want to do? Number two, why couldn't you deliver a simple response? Number three, why aren't all the generals who allowed, quote unquote, the Chinese to develop this technology fired for not being able to defend the homeland? Right? That's simply unacceptable. So, for any number of reasons, and the other thing too is every excuse that they tried to parade out, and by the way, I keep saying drones, they're UAPs, or they're UFOs. That's the other thing. There's a neuro-linguistic programmatic element about it, right? Where if we call them drones, then people will have a certain frame when they're looking up at the sky. So whatever they were not peer competitors. They were not hobbyist drones. And the other thing that people also leave out is at the time, we had just delivered a bunch of Air Force nuclear gravity bombs to Lakenheath. And where these drones first appeared.
Lakenheath. Yeah, they forget about Lakenheath because that happened first. Well, what first happened was in Nebraska and Colorado 2 years before, where they came night after night after night, and nothing was done about them because nothing could be done about them. Was that a test? Were they testing to be sure that they were invulnerable? Then they come over Langley, and we're sanguine about that? Come on. We would have been absolutely up in arms if this had been Chinese overflying Langley night after night. It's just ridiculous. I got the flight track of a plane that was a submarine hunter that was looking off the Jersey Shore on those nights when they were coming up out of the water off the Jersey Shore. I had friends on the shore watching them coming up out of the water. And they told me that there was this plane up there, and I got the flight track, and you can see from the flight track, the plane's just going over. They're not finding it. They're looking for something that they can't find. Now, is it really true that they wouldn't be able to find a Chinese submarine? Well, I don't think so. I think they would be able to find a Chinese submarine. And what happened, there's also another thing. The way this unfolded, the visitors have got two major issues that bleed into politics. I'm not supposed to talk politics except for these two issues, in fact. So I don't. I have my own political ideas, certainly, but I don't. At their request, I don't talk about those, but except these two. The first one is the danger of nuclear war, and the second one is climate change. Now, Lakenheath, for the first time in 20 years, the United States is placing nuclear weapons in the UK. The reason is that the UK's deterrent, which is 3 Trident submarines, is compromised. The Russians can find and kill those submarines now before they can be utilized. So the British don't have a really good nuclear deterrent.
I think they also recently did a test with one of their missiles on it. It was like a spectacular failure too.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd have to double check, but anyway, continue.
I don't know about that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I'd have to double check, but I think it was. But anyway, continue.
But the problem I think the visitors had was that there was going to be a change of administrations here, and the Americans would be in control of these missiles, meaning that it's a destabilizing maneuver. It's destabilizing. It creates a level of threat for the Russians that wasn't there before. They're going to be reacting very negatively to that. I think they've had experience with other planets that have had nuclear wars. Not their own, I don't think, but I think this has happened in this universe before.
It may have happened here before.
Yeah, could have happened here before, absolutely, in the distant past. In any case, the other thing is that Donald Trump was going to become president, and he rejects the whole idea of climate change completely, doesn't believe in it. So both of their issues were being stepped on at the same time. It starts at Lakenheath, and then it moves across, and where does it spend most of its time? Right over Donald Trump's golf course.
Also Picatinny Arsenal, likely where they put together. I don't. There's a lot of advanced weapons research, and maybe that's where they assemble some of the components of the nuclear weapons before they send them over. I'm guessing. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't know either.
They also appeared before over Barksdale Air Force Base, which is where I think it's like the 8th Strategic Bombing Wing or something like that is located.
Yes. So they definitely were, and Langley again, I mean, they definitely were, there was a high level of a show of force over military facilities and also over Donald Trump's facility in New Jersey, to the point where he said, "I'm not sleeping there." And he wouldn't have said that. I mean, I don't blame him. I mean, I wouldn't have done that either. But the point is, I think that that something was being said to us. And I think that if we do lose the planet, and I think we are going to, they're going to be really angry. And I piss them off all the time. I've pissed them off many times. And believe me, it's not fun. You don't want that. And if they do get angry, you don't want to be in their way, because they can do things that are remarkable when they're mad. And
all right, Whitley.
They get mad at you a lot. I said, yeah, they do. He said, well, everyone does. So it's not. She used to get mad at me too. People. I seem like a nice, very mild guy, but I somehow end up in situations where I make people mad all the time, including the visitors.
All right, Whitley, I kept you, I think, way too long. So any final words for the audience?
Oh, no. The only word is ontological shock is real. And the closer we get to this, the more the intellectual community, the scientific community, and the academic community are going to be screaming that it's not true, it's not true, it's not true. Go on Wikipedia and you will see they are on a tear to wreck everything true about this, because they can't handle it. And it's going to get worse. I'll tell you a brief story. We used to, in the days we had the cabin in upstate New York, we would get groups of people up. Everybody knows this. And the visitors would come. So we had a group of people up there that included a physicist and psychologist called John Glideman, a dear friend of mine, who was absolutely adamantly opposed to the visitor hypothesis. His theory was that it was something wrong with the vibrations of our refrigerator. He called it the refrigerator factor that was setting off hallucinations in my head. He was that far gone. In other words, he was desperate for explanation.
Yeah, that doesn't exactly fit Occam's razor. That's
not exactly, no. In any case, we're all in the stone circle I had built at the place that I was abducted. And we're sitting there, and it's just before lunch, and we're doing a meditation together, when suddenly this beautiful shaft of golden light comes down from above. It's not natural light. It's like a big laser or something. Beautiful. Everyone can see it. We're turning our heads to look at each other through it, because when you look at someone through it, the other person is incredibly vividly alive. It was a beautiful experience. One person couldn't see it. John Glideman could not see it. Could not see it. Everyone else could see it. He couldn't see it because he couldn't afford to. If he had seen it, his entire worldview would have collapsed. Everything he had built about understanding the world around us would be gone. He spent the rest of the day with an incapacitating headache because his mind was working so hard to push this away. That's the level of struggle a vast number of our best minds are going into now and will be in when this unfolds. It ain't gonna be easy, but it sure is going to, in the end, make mankind something entirely new if it works. That's my last word.
Well, thank you very much, Whitley. It's always a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of it's Memorial Day weekend when we're talking.
Yeah.
So enjoy your weekend and barbecue. Thank you again.
Bye.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.